Triumph certainly made the most beautiful of all bikes. They paid special attention to the mudguards and frame and streamlining of the whole thing, and I think their design was by far the prettiest of it all. There's another, the bathtub bottle. It's a different colour. This, the maroon one, is the 500 twin, whereas the early one we saw was the 350, and they also built a 650, the Thunderbird. Always have a great following, Triumphs. Still being produced today, which is what we can say about none of the others. Very sad. Many stories have been told as to the reason of the demise of the British motorcycle. No one will claim responsibility for it, but we certainly lost out being the prime producer.
Tell me what it's all about. That's a heavy haulage step. Just below the showground.
That's the Royal Enfield bullet, and if you saw the Enfield bullet now produced in India, you would see a great similarity. Now, we spoke about a Francis Barnett, effectively known as Fanny Barnett. This is about a 1936 or 7 Francis Barnett here. It was fully enclosed, known as the Cruiser, and a lot of forward thinking. It's a pity our motorcycle industry after the war weren't as forward thinking as some of the firms were before the war. Had they done that, and had we accepted it, then we'd have still had a lot of bikes on the road today. Another of the old go-to-work bikes produced just after the war by BSA. That's the C11. That's a 250 overhead valve, only a 3-speed gearbox. Speedometer set in the top of the tank, but a cheap bike, less than £100, and quite reliable. Coil ignition too, which was a good step forward in the post-war years. A little bit of renovation needed here, but sometimes I think it's nice to see the old original look. Now, this is something that was popular just before the war and after. The autocycle, long before they were called mopeds, built by many firms. This is the Renault. They were also built by Rudge Whitworth, Excelsior, Sun, Bound, etc. Just a cycle frame, and of course easy for people who weren't used to motorcycling to convert from a pedal cycle. There's the simple speedometer drive from the front wheel. There she is, the BSA Bantam. The engine design was pinched from DKW just after World War II had finished, and it went on to be a very famous little engine, especially in this, the competition model. Utter reliability. I once saw BSA Bantam advertised in a poultry column. Another old timer here. This gives example with the old Calthorpe Jap. Now, don't associate that name with the Japanese. It's J.A. Prestwick of London. He produced many an engine for not only stationary engines, but of course motorcycling. Good engine builders. But this is really going back in years now with the famous old belt drive. Wet weather, they didn't have slip. And with the old band brakes that you can see there, they didn't stop very easily either. But that was motorcycling in its difficult days. The old side valve engine there, look. Non-detachable head, the little leather bag on the side for the tools. No locks on them. Nobody pinched your tools in those days.
Come to the commentary point.
Used to go to the pictures right up until the 40s and 50s and just throw your leggings and overcoat over the saddle. It was still there when you come back. Times have changed now. That's the oiler there to show the flow of oil going to the engine. You had to pump your pressure, and the famous name of Brooks on the saddle. The old acetylene lighting. Ah, those were the days. Bags of levers to play with to control your ignition and your air. I'll bet that one draws a crowd. Another good old timer here, sporting the name of Bown Villiers, because even in those days fitted with a Villiers engine with that big outside flywheel and once again belt drive. A rare old timer is that. If you find one like this, well, hang on to it. Rare models such as this are worth their money. Once again, the old oil pump, and you could gauge on the left there the amount of oil flow that was required. Now someone looking at something a little bit different there, and here we have the container for the acetylene, the carbide. Keep the old lamps going. You see the old engines there, you see no detachable head on them, no electric horn. Douglas, a famous name, built in Kingswood in Bristol. Always made a great bike, invariably a twin-engine bike, and even went on to produce some good bikes after the war. But this is very old. This is one of the very early ones. Douglas, too, a name that earned fame on grass and speedway. Very fast bikes. Never seemed to get their marketing going, their production, and had lots of financial problems. And Scott too, there's an engine there, a parallel twin, water cooled, that was designed, what, 60 odd years ago, probably more, and they went on keeping that same engine after the war. They were the Birmingham Scott, and then the famous firm of Silk still produced that engine. So it just shows the soundness of that particular design. Another firm with a good racing background, Scott's. Parallel twin water-cooled two-strokes. This is the sort of thing that our Far Eastern friends advertise now, thinking it's something new. And we were doing it back just after World War I. There's nothing sounded like a Scott either. They were always known as the yowl of the Scott. They've certainly got their share of oldies here today. Another great firm that didn't produce after the war, the New Hudson. They did produce autocycles, but their old motorcycle manufacturing just died out in the 30s. But another great bike. Always picked the Scott out with that great radiator and a very unusual shaped petrol tank on them too. Note the hand change, something you'd never sell a bike with nowadays, would you? You can see there the damper on the forks, that is to damp your spring on your suspension. No teleforks in those days. Everything sound mechanical, ideas, no sophistication, but a treat to ride and enjoy, especially this old competition Norton, a very sought after bike. A lot of these bikes here are fairly common and fairly easy to come by as far as classic collectors are concerned, but others are rare and most collectible. So if you do decide to join the classic and vintage bike circle, then you've got to decide whether you want something that's just nice to ride or something that's nice to own. A nice lineup here of bikes from the 50s and 60s. And now we're going to have another chance to show off the sound of these old favourites as they trundle around the ring once more.
Like clothes on a washing machine, washing line.
It's a great day for these old bikers here because they can go around the ring, not lumbered with crash helmets and riding gear, nice bit of sunshine, and riding in a nice free way, the way we used to years ago before the dangers on the road reached the scale that they have now. It's nice just sitting there with a good hot bike between your knees and hands drop down on those handlebars, and you suddenly get the urge to wind it up. And that old timer there is probably reminiscent over those days of yore, thinking about the things I've just been mentioning. Points of interest, always to be noted by the enthusiasts. Some of them critical about not having the right footrest or the right markings on there. And here we have our first combination we've seen in this little show. The cheapest form of transport ever, only half the price of the normal insurance to run a combination. Certainly much cheaper than the car, and I think the Mini was the one who eventually came in and gradually put the motorcycle combinations off the road. What a fine lineup. Of course, number plates too, some of them aren't the correct age. Most of these appear to be quite genuine and original. It is possible now to get age-related numbers if you haven't got the correct number plate on your bike. There's another real collector's piece there, the BSA Gold Star. BSA produced their Gold Star as their competition model for many years, since before the war. And at one time, the Clubman's TT over in the Isle of Man, it became a little bit boring to see them at the top of the scale on each of those events. Another famous old single by Triumph, either the Tiger 90 or Tiger 80, that one. On the later Matchlesses, when Matchless and AJ all became the AMC, Associated Motorcycle, and they're one of the early plunger gold flashes. There are bathtub Triumphs. Certainly a love-hate bike. You either love them or hate them, because the old open work motorcyclists really frowned on the Triumphs when they enclose the rear wheel in this way. Famous old name of Excelsior. Didn't go much on his paint finish on there. A couple more Triumphs here. Certainly the most popular or common of all classic bikes because of their long run of production. The aerial arrow. Aerial leaders and aerial arrows were very forward thinking in their design. Press steel construction, look, twin two-stroke, a very nice handling little machine too, with a good return of performance. But once again, the British motorcyclist, the old stick in the mud that he was, sort of frowned on them. But there are a lot of people looking for them now. Aerial could see the way ahead long before Mr. Average Motorcyclist could. There's the BSA combination, a sidecar possibly by Watsonians, a firm that's been making sidecars for many, many years and still in production up there in the Cotswolds now. Took a bit of getting used to riding the combination after riding a solo. You've got to forget all about balancing, which is quite difficult when you're sat on the same machine that you've been balancing for a long time. And the windscreen, that was always popular to them. You will always find that on the man who rode to work regularly. The sporting motorcyclists tended to poo-hoo you if you put a windscreen on your bike, but you ride backward and forward to work regularly, 5 and 6 days a week, you were half glad to have a windscreen on there. Another big Bonneville. The Silver Jubilee model, I see. Once again, an issue like that would certainly add a lot of money to the cost and value of your machine. There's a bike I'm very fond of, is Velocette. This is one of the old Camivellos, the overhead camshaft model, who had a wonderful racing pedigree back in the 30s, and of course just post-war too. A great machine, not one of the big husky heavy bikes, but everything was reasonably lightweight and finely machined, and there are a lot of very proud Velocette owners about now. And just look at that for a record. Another famous make of SOS, the Super Onslow Special. And at this point in time, Mr. Onslow is still riding a motorcycle well up in his 90s. I think it's his ambition to ride a motorcycle on his 100th birthday. A grand old fellow who built some grand old bikes. Now, you get a number plate on an old bike like this, you get a lot of collectors would buy it and sell the number plate. But thank heaven this proud SOS owner hasn't done just that. A lot of this happens at auctions. And here's the famous Brockbank Corgi, based on the wartime well bike that was designed to fold up and go into the airborne gliders so that the troops had some form of communication when they reached the ground. And these little corgis were very popular in post-war years. They were